we can do it the way that we just record actions and
Yeah.
That's actions and important points.
Okay.
Then I'm fine. Until I have a slide somewhere. Then if someone can take over.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So this is what we're going to talk about today. It's a little bit garbled, but basically I have a section on tracks, a section on objects, and a section on miscellaneous, and then discussion of offer to receive. So is Taylor on?
I am.
Okay. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right. So we're starting with some issues related to tracks. This first issue is that due to the changes we made to support early media, meaning receiving media before an answer is received, an RTP receiver along with the media stream track is created at offer time rather than answer time, and that track, if this ID can't change after creation, that would mess things up. So, the situation we're in is that the track ID from the answer or even from remote offers a lot of the time is going to end up ignored, and the track will just end up with a generated ID that was determined when you call add track or add transceiver. And this could be a problem for applications that are relying on using the track ID to signal something. For example, signaling this track ID is the speaker, and if we're receiving multiple video tracks, you'd use that information to tell how to interpret the tracks. Next slide. So you could get around this problem by just switching to using mids to signal this mean instead. So the track event does tell you which transceiver the track is associated with, and you can, instead of signaling mean with track IDs, you can signal means with mids instead. Maybe there's a bit more code to write, but that still works. But for applications that still want to use track IDs, come up with this pretty simple addition to the spec that provides that information without having to make the application parse STP itself. So we add this remote track ID attribute, which is a DOM string attribute on RTP transceiver, and it just will return basically the contents of the A equals MSID attribute in the corresponding media description in the remote description if one exists. So I think this should address anyone's concerns who still needs track IDs, because now you can get it by just looking at transceiver.remote track ID in the track event. So are people okay with adding this, or do you want to remove, or other changes?
Taylor, let me just ask a couple questions here. Basically, I'm okay with this proposal, though I don't think it should be called track ID. I think it should be called app data, because that's actually what it's called in the STP, and it's no longer really the track ID. But why doesn't the track ID just change to be what you're going to put in the remote track ID? That's how it worked before. So why do we need to change it so it works differently?
Because before, the track was actually created when you applied the description. So it can be created, with that ID provided, but now the track already exists, so you'd have to be changing its ID after creation, and that's likely to mess up other algorithms that, rely on media stream track IDs. Assume media stream track IDs remain constant.
Right. So, we always had this with, if you reused, like on a reoffer or something. So I guess where did we assume that track IDs on a receiver remained constant? Do we really need to assume that? And,
we would have to go to the media capture and stream spec and say, here's how you change the track ID and make sure that works everywhere. That seems like opening a can of worms. I don't think we've considered that before.
I don't think we need to change any of that. I mean, what we've always had is that the track ID on the receiver side, it's only receiver tracks here, that track IDs that are the problem. And
Yeah.
how the semantics of it were before is they were the ID of the sender. And if the sender changed its ID due to changing whichever tracks got mapped onto it and stuff, I read the specs previously as saying that would get reflected over to the other side and it would change.
Well,
obviously,
because
I'm not fixed to that behavior, but I'm just saying that's how I interpreted them before.
That is how it worked before, but in that case, you would get an entirely new track. And now you would only get a new track if you have a new M section or an M section is recycled.
Okay. I mean, I guess what I'm basically getting at is I don't understand why we need to make a change here, though I don't really have any fundamental objections to your change you're proposing.
Well, again, it's not that we need to, because the mid can be used for the same purpose.
No. By change, I mean, why are we making track IDs be constant when they didn't used to be?
But I don't know. Track IDs, they've always been constant, but you've got a new track.
I see. Okay, well, maybe that's what's happened here. When you get a track ID that doesn't match, it should make a new track. I mean, that's the other, that would be consistent with what we had, right?
But the point of having a track at offer time is that I can hook up this track to a renderer and be assured that it will play media as soon as it's received, even if it's before the answer. So if we say when you get an answer, actually we create a new track, that defeats the purpose, because what would that old track even be used for then?
Right. You would have had to create it with the correct name if you wanted it to be hooked up. So I get your point. This sort of seems like a not big deal change. I do wonder if we should just move, if the track IDs are a unique thing that you use to keep track of track IDs, why they're the same as the app data and the SDP, I don't really know. Maybe we just want to have completely separate setter and getter for app data and not sort of cause track ID to be stuffed into the app ID. Right?
Wait, so what are you proposing exactly? Besides renaming this to app data, do you want to, go change the MSID spec?
No. The MSID spec would stay the same, which does not have the concept of track ID in it, really. It has app data in it, is what goes in the field, right? There's some discussion, there's probably some text in there that probably should have been in a WebRTC spec versus that, but, I mean, it's app data. And then we just, the default app data setting is the track ID, but we allow a setter on the sender side to set the track ID, and we allow a getter on the receiver side to get the track ID. Or sorry, the app, I got backwards, to get the app data. And that makes it very clear that the app data can change even though the track ID doesn't.
But Cullen, if you then change it, then you would have to make a offer answer procedure to have it reflected.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I think it doesn't really matter in which SDP field it goes to the other side. I mean, the whole idea here is to allow people to see kind of synchronize which track is used in which way on both sides of the peer connection. So that we happen to use the app data field in SDP for it, that irrelevant in this case.
Okay. Well, I mean, as I said, I just think this is colossally confusing as it currently, as the proposal is, but I think it works fine. I got no real objections to Taylor's proposal as is, right? I just think the reason we're at this stage and have this wrong is because everyone's been confused about it and think it works different ways.
Yeah. I think the real confusion is that the API has evolved so much over time. I mean, it used to be like you always get a new track, and then we have these senders that's kind of like a pipe and then you can replace the track inside of it. So suddenly the track on the receiving side is not the track it used to be. So I mean, that's the whole confusion with IDs in this case.
Yeah. So the fact they're called an ID makes you think they should be constant and not change, right?
So given all this confusion, do we need also additional explanatory text because we just try to figure it out ourselves for the last 10 minutes?
Hi, this is Janimar. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to break people here. And this is because we have transceivers. It's a paradigm shift where you don't add track on one end and they appear on the other. Tracks are now, the remote track are attached to the sender. So it's a totally different model as far as lifetime for the track. So when you negotiate a sender track, we don't end remote tracks anymore. We just mute them. So that definitely, I think, would be prudent with somehow for people to grok this change, given that we have implementations in all browsers now almost, and none of them work this way. So my only comment on, so I think remote track kind of exists because there is a way to basically work around by parsing the SDP remotely and figuring out this SDP track for people who really don't want to use MID or have some reason to do it the old way. So in that sense, I think remote track ID is the best solution. The only solution that might be better would be if there was, excuse me, if there was any kind of feeling in media capture for allowing us to change the track ID itself. And if that's uglier, this is ugly either way, but it's a bit of remote track ID feels like a bit of a band-aid solution, but it might, I guess, it might still be better than having mutable media stream track IDs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's hard to know how much that would change would affect.
So
would be limited to remote tracks. Yeah, go ahead.
Will there be an event related when, if someone does replace track on one side and then the remote track ID of the receiver is updated? Is there an event connected to that?
I believe you fire the track event at the exact point where the ID would change or remote track ID would appear. Is that right, Taylor?
We would fire the track event if an M section is becoming capable of receiving media when it previously wasn't. But replace track would not do that because replace track doesn't require any signaling, and the receiver just starts receiving stream media unaware of anything happens.
So this doesn't work with replace track.
No.
Oh shit! That should be mentioned.
The replace track is already defined to not change the remote ID, I thought.
Exactly. But then we have this mechanism to allow people to actually access the remote ID, but it doesn't work with the replace track. So.
No,
then we come to the point of, well, maybe we should have a setter on the sending side that allowed it to change. Right? And when you did a replace track, you could choose to set that or not, or call it.
But then you need to negotiate.
I mean, the only reason this is added basically is for backwards compatibility for applications that are built around track IDs and want to keep using track IDs. But we shouldn't worry about making it work for replace track and everything because people using the transceiver API should be using the MID or other information to associate meaning.
But the question is if we're trying to help applications using track ID, and if people, we're adding new API here, so to be able to make track ID work, they need to update their apps to use this new hack.
Right.
And they might consider changing to using MID anyhow.
This was raised by a user.
Make this usable or remove it completely from the spec, right? We shouldn't do like a half-assed job of it.
This was raised by a user who said they were not going to use replace track and they were not going to use early media, and because they just wanted it to work the way it used to. So Adam is right that this track matching scheme is broken both by transceivers and earlier it was also broken by replace track for those who use replace track.
But will this help people? They need to update their apps anyhow.
No, but I
This
think
is
the
a new
point
property.
is, I think the point here is that instead of considering this a legacy support, we could actually consider it a simple API support. So that essentially we support two models. We support a track model and we support the transceiver model. But the track model has limits, right? And you just say, you can use the track model as long as you don't care about early media or using replace track. As long as you don't do either of those things, you can use the simple model with what we've put in. So I have to say I kind of like that, but it depends on how much additional work we have to do to the spec to make that work.
I think if we're going to have a way to make this work, it should work in all the cases, and all we have to do is set a setter on the other side. And you're right, that will cause a renegotiation. But we have tons of things that cause a renegotiation, and the codes are, we just set the flag renegotiation needed in the spec, and in the code you don't really add. You already have code to deal with that event. So,
wait, so you're saying you would set an attribute on the sender side. It would cause on negotiation needed. It would cause you to create a new offer with this, one field different. You signal that offer to the other side. Now it sees the field is different. That seems like way more effort than you need to do when you can just signal, send a signaling message independently.
Yeah.
Then by that argument, we should remove this totally, right? I think that's what I meant. Of we should either do this or not do it. And you're right. We could remove this totally, and it's not a bad message.
All this is doing is providing an accessor for something that's already in the SDP, as a little convenience. So I don't think it's that, we're, introducing a whole new model here and we either have to, completely make sure it works completely or not at all. We already have a track model we're trying to support, with add track. This is just, a little band-aid or, a little convenience for people who still care about that track ID thing in SDP that's now being ignored.
Okay, but us adding a thing that says you can use this, except in this case, and except in this case, and except in this case, which will be really hard for most implementers to even understand what those cases are or where they come up or if they do use them. I object to that. That I don't like.
Well,
implementers will understand it.
It's a little easier for those people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Colin, the only way to understand this is what Dan proposed is just like a simple model, because you're right, you can't make it work across the whole thing, but I don't think that's our intent.
But removing a remote track ID, well, it's not in yet, but not having a remote track ID does not remove the need to understand what's going on for implementers. This is, if anything, what I like about this is that it gives us at least a place in the spec to talk about this wart. And it is a wart whether we have it visible in the spec or not.
We definitely do need to talk about it because it's not obvious.
So to me, we either have this attribute here or we have a giant note about how to extract this information from SDP.
Well, I'm suggesting that the SDP doesn't require this data to be on the field at all. I'm saying that if what we're telling people is you've got to change your code, we broke this old track ID thing, you can't use it anymore. And so figure out how to use some other separate signaling information to make this work. And track IDs are not put in the SDP at all. They're not sent in it. And they are unique to your side. There's no coordination of track IDs using SDP between the two sides. If you need to coordinate them, do it some other way.
I mean, I'd be fine with, going full force on the getting rid of track ID signaling path, but I sent an email to MMusic and there weren't any responses. So.
No, I responded to you in MMusic, but ignoring that, the MMusic spec as it stands does not really require. I mean, that you can have app data or not in the SDP, right? The way that MSID is written.
I don't know about that. It
has some text that says WebRTC will use.
And here I'm reading a sentence right here. The value of the MSID app data field in MSID consists of the ID attribute of a media stream track as defined in the media stream track's WebIDL specification. Seems pretty clear that That's what it's used for.
There is a bunch of text in there about how WebRTC specifically uses it, but it's not about how it's used in general in SIP. And probably all that text about how WebRTC specifically uses it should not be in a general in music draft. It should be over in somewhere else, right? That text should be removed regardless of anything else.
I mean, I don't hear real consensus for adding this PO that we actually merged. What problems would it cause if we reverted that and removed it and were at the stage we were at like 1.5 weeks ago?
Let me add one thing that I think it is possible to use for an app to use replace track as long as they keep track of the original ID, and they'd have to just understand and correlate and keep the tracks that were replaced and correlate the original track instead. So it is doable. It's ugly, but if people want to do it that way.
And it's doable to use MID and so on as well.
Yes, people should be using MID. So if we can get everyone on board with that, but that doesn't work in any browser right now. So.
Question from the renderer side: how does this supposed to work? If you have a new track and then how do we put that on the render on the video tab, for example?
A new track, you mean?
Or is it just same track and then with a different ID on the track?
Yeah, the same track, but this new field that Taylor has proposed changes. Not the actual track ID, but this remote track ID field.
Okay, right. The track ID will start as something, and at initial value, but it will stay that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I like the idea earlier from Anwar. If we can just reuse that ID in Get User Media, because that's a read-only ID. It's generated by the UA, and UA has full control of it.
Yeah, but I guess that is what happens in a sense now. If you create a transceiver, you get the track with a random ID, and that stays constant even if you add the remote track that is feeding into this track, or changes the remote track that is feeding into this track.
Yeah, it is a bit of a heresy to have an ID that changes.
Yeah.
All right.
The good news is that, as far as I understand, media stream IDs can still be preserved because they don't become public to JavaScript until the track event fires. So for people who have only one audio track and one video track in their streams, they could correlate that way. So this would only be a problem for once you start adding multiple tracks of a kind.
Right.
So
does anyone ever do that? Well, probably not because it is inconsistent with their browsers right now, but I'm sure some people do.
And the last note here is that remotely, there's really no guarantee that track IDs are unique on the page anyway. You can have collisions from multiple participants, which I guess is rare since it's a UUID. You could also have someone sending the same track twice, which is possible. So that's kind of why we switched to MID. So.
So what do we put down in the notes for a resolution?
I mean, I like remote track ID just because at least we've explained what exists, and there's an API. So does it encourage bad use? I don't know.
So it's like a convenience thing for instead of parsing the FTP.
I see Colin's point about maybe calling it, MSID app data or something instead. To make it more general, but I mean that's basically what it is, just providing access for something in SDP.
But you would never get an event when this changes, right?
It was just that
it changes as part of the track.
Change when saying a remote description, but you wouldn't get an event, no.
you are in the process of applying the SDP though, so it's not. I mean, I wouldn't argue we needed an event when this changes.
I thought I heard earlier some objections to this, and so I asked the question: should we revert it? But
I mean,
what do people think?
I think my preference right now, having sort of heard this conversation, would be add the SDP accessor called get app data or something, as Taylor just described, but also add a set app data on the sender side, so that an application can deal with all the hard cases if it wants to. And the default value of the app data would be the track ID as it is today.
And that would address the replace track.
Yep.
If you want to.
But then you need to negotiate to get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what the track model means. I mean, I'm not suggesting we go this route, but we could even add, you add something on replace track that's optional. If somebody actually provides an ID, a track ID, then what you're saying is do negotiation, which kind of defeats the purpose of replace track for 99% of the people who use replace track. But I'm just saying conceptually, you can get that effect by leaving replace track the way it is and doing what Cullen mentioned.
Well, hold on, but this new thing seems redundant since we already have MID, and MID works, and it even works with replace track. So
I understand that argument, but I think if you want to go down that argument, my suggestion is we do not write any track ID into the SDP, nor receive it, and we get rid of all of it. We just use MID. I mean, the track ID had a specific sort of use case that people imagine how to use it and deal with it. And as Dan points out, you can use it that way. I don't think that adding a setter of this data, I'm not saying, and yes, it would cause a renegotiation, but generally anytime if you wanted that to happen in your application, it means you want to do a round trip of messaging anyway. So, people who want to use that, it's a very easy way for them to use it if they're using that model. People who don't want to use it can use MID, and they will never use any of it on either side.
Right.
But it's at least complete. It's usable. I feel like only doing half of it is very unusable. So I would rather see us completely remove it or fix it on both sides, not just fix it on the receiver side. That's sort of where I am.
But are we at this, we revert this PR and someone gets the task to create a new PR that is more complete. I mean, that adds the capabilities to set it on the sender side.
I think, speaking for me, I would rather not add anything then. I mean, just remove this. And
remove these, but
I agree, though. I mean,
then we get the new. Yeah.
I only add this because it was extremely cheap. It's just an accessor for something in SDP. I don't want to go, down the route of, adding APIs to make, ensure someone can, use track IDs everywhere, even if they're using replace track and other things. That's seems out of scope.
Well, I mean, in fairness, Taylor, I'm imagining this to be, about the same amount of text on the sender side as the receiver side. Just like, look, when this is set, it sets the value that's put in the next offer answer cycle, and, sets the renegotiation needed flag. Or I don't even care if it sets the renegotiation flag.
No, that affects JSON now too.
No, this doesn't affect JSON.
Well, it affects what goes in SDP. Right now, JSON would say, the transceiver, when you add a transceiver, the ID is, decided based on the track, and that's what goes in the MSID field. Yeah. Now it'd be also, could be the value from set app data.
Yeah. I think we need to wrap this discussion up with at least some conclusion.
So having two IDs seems redundant.
Good point.
Yeah. And adding new API for people to use the old way, I think that's kind of strange.
And no matter what we do, people have to change their code.
Right.
Yeah. should we? So the resolution is that should we revert this and
yeah, I think
Yes.
we revert 1567, and of course anyone that has a better idea are free to propose it. But for now we revert.
And the issue remains open, I guess.
Well, we can just close the issue as, if you want this, you have to parse the SDP yourself, which that's not the end of the world.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy with that.
Let's do that.
Sure, and just like add a note in the track ID to make it very clear that like this does not mirror the track ID on the far side. Right, so we don't.
Yeah.
So people.
We need that explanation as well somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's 1563.
67. Yeah. And
just
close.
a quick question. Janavar, you made the comment that MID wasn't really properly supported.
Well, it isn't
Anyway.
in the code yet. It isn't in the code
yes,
yet.
right. That's what I meant.
So saying it will solve everything is a little bit premature.
Yeah, I wrote a blog on the evolution of WebRTC 1.0 that kind of touches on if you want to correlate remote tracks. You can right now the most stable thing you could do is correlate media streams, as we expect that to continue to work. And then if you have more than one track of a kind, it gets tricky.
Okay. So
right. I'm familiar with your blog entry, but thanks. Go ahead.
Let's try to move on to the next issue, okay?
There's still one question for the last issue. Hopefully it shouldn't take that long. Okay, so currently the only time where the MSID app data field actually is the track ID is when you're saying a remote description that has a new M section with a track, which is, probably not a very common situation. If you're just, sending a track, bidirectionally between two peer connections, then both of them would end up with generated IDs. So my question is, should we, just, remove this case of the track ID matching as well and just have them always be generated for consistency? So it'd be odd if, someone writes an application relying on the track ID and it, works in this one situation and then they try another situation and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, Taylor.
It doesn't sound like
MSID app data field would become, defunct, basically. At least WebRTC wouldn't be using it. All right.
No. There's no harm in leaving it either, I guess, other than some confusion, but there will be confusion. So.
But to be clear, this situation is if you use add track and then negotiate.
I mean, I think I'm coming around to the proposal here is we do not read or write the SDP app data anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, or just end up with the random value all the time.
But we still want MSIDs to match, yeah?
Of course. But just the app data goes on after it, so we which is optional. We'd update the various specs just to basically be like, we no longer have to worry about one more identifier in the SDP data, which no one knows what we do with it because there's already not enough confusing identifiers in it. Right? I mean,
but
it seems like a strong argument for not using it.
But then we would break applications that behave nicely and rely on track ID, the way it used to work. If we start generating old track IDs,
I think we've already broken them. Is the conclusion we came to. We've already done that.
In 90% of cases or so.
Okay.
Or maybe we'll just
70.
Yeah, but I was thinking about the last 20 or 30 or 10.
We should try and move on. Maybe we'll leave this question for mailing list.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. This is a very related issue in that due to the paradigm shift of the transceiver model, we stopped having visible effects of remove track being called. Essentially, remove track just stops the sender from sending anything, and it changes the M section direction if it was send receive to receive only. But aside from that, there weren't as many visible changes. So you would have to check the direction attribute after every set remote description if you wanted to see if this happened. So after PR 1402, now there are some visible changes. If the track was part of any streams, it will be removed and it'll be muted. And then if the transceiver direction changes back, then the track event will fire again. It'll be added to the stream again. It'll be unmuted. But it won't be ended because there still is that possibility that the sender will start sending again, and the receiver's track needs to start receiving media again. So that's what I tried to summarize in the little table there. So, is this situation enough for people, or do we also need a solution that results in the remote track being ended when the removed track is called on the other side?
This is Janiver. I think this is fine. I think I have accepted that tracks don't end.
Yeah.
I mean, if it actually ends, we would have a lot of other problems.
Right.
Because it could never be reawakened according to the media capture spec.
Exactly. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, so we conclude that.
All right, so I think we can close at least those issues then.
Yep. All right, on to objects.
So the resolution is to accept the state after PR 1402.
Yeah, and I guess we can close. So we're saying we can close 1161 and 1181. Okay.
Okay.
And
So
we can close 1161
and 1181.
Okay, thank you.
all right, so background on this issue. You can use rtv_sender.set parameters to affect what codec is being sent by taking the codec list, which comes basically from the contents of the corresponding media description and the remote description, and reordering the codec such that the one you like is on top. Now, then we had the problem of what happens when you set a new remote description with a new codec list and decided that it just blows away the reordering that you've done before, and it returns to being a list that matches the remote description. The problem with this is that means that every new offer answer you do, the codec you've selected before goes away, and you have to call set parameters again. And possibly this would create some churn in the implementation as it's trying to release and reserve hardware resources or whatever, or causing a frame to leak out with the codec from the remote description before set parameters has a chance to be called, that sort of thing. So what I'm proposing doing in this PR 1592 is, instead of having the codec be selected by reordering the list, you just set a codec payload type field in the encoding parameters that references one of the codecs from the list, which is how it works in WebRTC. And this simplifies things. It means that we can say that as long as a subsequent remote description still has that payload type, the codec payload type field can stay the same, and you can just continue sending with that codec. Here's a description of the attribute on the slide. It's pretty straightforward. If it's unset, then implementation will use its default policy, which is probably just using whatever the remote endpoint prefers. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this approach matches ORTC. I think that just setting one attribute is simpler than having to reorder a list. And also, part of the motivation I think for having the list that can be reordered is that it allows you to remove codecs completely. For example, things that may not be used, for media directly, like things like comfort noise or other sort of meta codecs. But that's now possible with RTP transceiver set codec preferences. So basically, our set parameters doesn't need to support completely removing codecs because there's another way to do that. So now that, the only thing set parameters needs to allow you to do is select the sent codec. The codec payload type approach seems like a simpler way to do that. And one more thing to note is that I put this on RTP encoding parameters in the PR, which matches ORTC, but that means that it would now be possible to select different codecs per encoding. So if that's something we don't want to support in WebRTC 1.0, then I could move the attribute up a level to RTP parameters instead.
Well, or you could just put restrictions on it, and say certain things you can't do.
Yeah, I guess so. We can just say you have to match for all encodings. That's sort of just a different flavor of the same thing now.
Okay, so I don't think this is fully explained here. So we talked about this a lot when we came up with the current sort of design of how this preferences work. And so the important part is that if you had one offer and there'd been a list of codecs, and then you're like, I don't want to do this one particular codec, and you're eliminating that. But then you get a reoffer in that perhaps reorders the priority of some of those other codecs. The browser needs to take care of that and needs to do the priority that there needs to be a way to implement stuff such that it's not hard for it to the browser should do whatever the other side said it preferred, unless it has a very strong indication not to do that. And this seems like it's going to unfortunately lock it to one.
The indication not to do that is that you set the codec payload type field and you're saying, I don't care about the receiver's preferences, this is what I want to send. So that's the purpose of the set parameters, is to affect what you want to send and have direct control over that.
I can live with that. I'm not in favor of having that API at all, but never mind that. But so what API do I use if I don't want to do that, but I want to have the API that says, I will honor the SVP as it's supposed to be done, right? But I won't do this one codec. Like you're saying there's a different API that I use to control that?
That's RTP transceiver set codec preferences. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
So if you want to completely eliminate a codec from negotiation or change or receive preferences, you can use set codec preferences for that. If you want to select a codec to be sent, you can use RTP sender set parameters.
Okay.
What
and the only difference here is before you had to call set parameters every time you did set local, and now you don't have to do it. That's set the only change. Or set remote.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we have consensus to take this change?
You just get an error if it's an invalid one that's not in the current list of codecs?
Yeah, that would just be added to the step of parameter validation that,
Right.
I think it is in this PR even. I just didn't quote that in the slide.
But it's not an error to this function call. It's an error that happens much later, right? Like you set it, and then 10 minutes later you get an offer where it's no longer in the list, and you have to generate the error then.
If a description is set later where it's no longer in the list, then I chose to have it revert to using the receiver's preferred codec. And the codec payload type field, if you call get parameters, will be unset then.
Okay, I remember this whole discussion before. That's why we did it and said you had to set it every time was so you could get the error. Because now what happens is the codec changes to something you didn't want without you even getting a notification that it changed.
Well, that would have always been the case.
No, because you would have done the set parameters on every single time, and it would have that set parameters would have given you the error. Sorry, that's not a valid choice.
Oh, okay. I get what you're saying. Or your application would have tried to reorder the codex and seen, oh, the one I want is not on the list. I think that's what would happen first.
Well, I mean, this isn't the reorder case. This is the case where you're specifically setting the one you want to send. Anyway, I don't care deeply about this, but like we discussed this a long time ago, and the reason I think that one of the parts of that conversation of why we didn't like this design and why we went to the you have to set it every time was the error reporting.
My recollection is that the reason we went with the you have to set it every time is because we wanted to make what you were saying earlier happen, where when you call set remote description, it does what remote description said.
And also because we didn't want to open the can of worms of, I do this reordering, now remote description adds some codecs and removes some codecs. How do you intersect, the new list with my reordered list?
Right.
We said, okay, that seems really complicated. Let's just say it gets blown right every time. But now if it's a simpler API, we don't have that problem.
And at the time that we added set parameters with codecs, we didn't have the codec preferences on the transceiver. And now that we have the codec preferences on the transceiver, we can have a more simple version of the codec choice and set parameters, which I think that's what Taylor's proposing here, is a more simple version. So I'm in favor of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Works for me.
Okay.
So the resolution is to accept what's in PR 1592.
Yep.
Okay. This is probably what we'll spend the remainder of the discussion on. When do ICE transports and DTLS transports, or the objects, get created? The first question is, do you get a new RTC ICE transport object on ICE restart? And I've thought about this a lot, and in summary, I don't see any advantages to having a new object, and I see that I think it would introduce some complexities. Either we need to have, DTLS transports, ICE transport attribute become, a list so that you can inspect both the old and the new ICE transport while the restart is occurring, or you need some other way to get access to both objects. And the rest of the spec is written around the assumption that there will be one object, so it would require some changes elsewhere. And I don't really see that having one object hurts us, because you can still see both the new and old candidates by calling get local candidates. You can see whether the current candidate pair is from the previous ICE generation or new generation by inspecting the candidate, active candidate pair attribute. The ICE state will change from connected back to checking, or I guess it would go from completed to connected and then eventually completed again. So I feel like all the information that an application would need can be communicated with one object, and having two objects doesn't really bias anything.
It's not just two, it's N.
Oh yeah, two objects per restart.
Yeah. No, I agree that having lots of objects is unmanageable.
Agreed. Yeah, I think is Ecker on the call? Because I believe when we talked about this last time, he was the main person who wanted there to be a new object.
I'm I've seen on my app that Ecker is joining and leaving the call.
Yeah, I'm on the call, but hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah. Yes, I'm on the call, but WebEx has been giving me trouble. I still think this is a little odd, but I'm willing to defer to the consensus.
Yeah. I just don't see how it can work any other way.
Yeah, I think we would have to go down a road where the DTLS transport has more than one ICE transport, and that's not a road I'd like to go down.
Yeah.
Plus, Taylor's next slide, I think, proposes having similar behavior with the DTLS transport.
All right, so it sounds like there's consensus that you do not get a new RTC ICE transport object on ICE restart. It just, the existing object gets new candidates and state changes according to the state table we defined.
Right.
So the resolution is to go for one object,
Yeah.
as you recommend.
And then 1406.
Now, this is a similar question, but for UTLS transports. I guess we can, this issue specifically talks about when a local offer initiates an ICE restart and then the remote endpoint decides to also have a new DTLS association. But I think we can, there's also the situation where a remote offer initiates a new DTLS association. So I think first we should answer the general question of should new DTLS associations result in new DTLS transport objects or not. And I guess similar to the reasoning on the last slide, I don't see that having multiple objects would provide the application with anything new, and it would create more complexity since now you have to manage multiple objects and see if the object changed, then maybe I need to hook up a new state change event handler, as mentioned here. So again, I think it would be simpler if the existing DTLS transport object had the set of remote fingerprints or remote certificates change when you set the description, and its state would go from connected back to connecting, for example, but you still have one object. I was sort of on the fence about this because it sort of makes more sense intuitively that a new DTLS association would result in a new object. But when I started thinking about the practical implications, I don't think that actually buys us anything.
Yeah, I think the reasoning for this is much the same as the other one. It's just not manageable to have it work any other way.
I think this one could be a little more manageable, but I agree with Taylor's assessment that it doesn't really buy the application developer anything to have multiple objects, and implementing it to look like one object is easy. So there's really no advantage to having it be a separate object, and it's just additional complexity.
Right.
All right, does anyone disagree, or are we okay with both, ICE restarts use the same ICE transport object and new DTLS associations on the same M section use the same DTLS transport object?
Sounds like we have consensus.
All right, that was a lot easier than I expected.
Don't worry, other ones will be hard to make up for it.
Okay, I sort of wanted to talk about this here because I thought it would be a good opportunity to, but it mostly concerns IETF standards, so I'm not sure if we need to. It did get some traction on the RTC web mailing list, but let me just maybe summarize the issue in a minute, and then we can decide what to do. So basically there are some issues with bundle used with ICE and specifically triple ICE, where it may be ambiguous if an M section is rejected, what the endpoints are supposed to do as fallback, like whether they should use an existing ICE session or use a new one, because the bundle spec is written largely around the concepts of there being unique and shared addresses, but for ICE, where the address is something that can change, and where if one hasn't been selected yet, it'll just be empty, O.O.O.O with a port 9. You can't rely on the address to signal mean reliably. So current implementations, at least Chrome and Firefox, follow a policy of the ICE transport follows the M section, meaning if I create an offer with an audio and video section, I start with an audio ICE transport and a video ICE transport. If I negotiate bundling, then things start being bundled on the audio transport. Now, if the audio M section gets rejected, that's a problem because sort of, you know, that ICE transport is attached to that M section. So the current, you know, best solution for this problem, I think, based on the RTC Web discussion, is to require having unique UFrags for ICE sessions, even on on the same side of the negotiation. Meaning, in the initial offer, you would have, you know, one UFrag passed with combination for the audio M section and one for the video M section, and then you can you know, reliably or unambiguously signal which ICE session you want to be used as fallback, because, you know, the UFrags are unique, and if it's the same UFrag as an existing session, it means use that existing session. So I guess I just wanted to get some, you know, thoughts about that on, you know, from the people in this group, from implementers, and then maybe to take that information back to the RTC Web mailing list or MMusic, I think, because it would actually require changes in the bundle spec, and you know, recommend something. All right, mate.
I'll just, since no one else is saying anything, I think you're right that we need some kind of identifier, and if we don't add one, I think that the UFrag is a good stand-in for an identifier.
Yeah.
So this is a good compromise between, you know, adding something which would be more complex and just using something instead.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other... Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, that matches my opinion too. UFrag is a very convenient handle for ICE session.
Yep. Okay.
All right, and we're already using it to identify successive ICE generations, so it's not a huge stretch to say it's also used to identify different, you know, ICE sessions within an individual generation.
Yep.
All right, so I guess I'll go for it.
Let me ask a question here on this one. Like, everything you're saying makes sense. I'm just wondering about the case. Remember, ICE is already widely used. So if you had two M lines with two different ICE sessions, and they have their UFrags for each one of them, you're not even doing bundle, okay? Just two M lines, two different ICE sessions. And then you swapped you swapped those two ICE sessions, okay? You just said on your next offer answer, you said that, you know, A used to be using ICE session 1, now it's using 2, and the other one's using 1. I mean, that would not work in any existing ICE implementation I'm aware of. So
no, that would be
I want to make sure we're not implying you could do that, right?
No, that would be interpreted as an ICE restart for both M sections. It's only with the bundle spec where now, you know, an M section may be using a transport that's described in some other M section where this becomes an issue, where you need some way to actually identify the transport, where previously, you know, the M section index was essentially, you know, that identifier, or, you know, you didn't need one because you can just rely on, you know, things being matched by the M section index.
So can't you use the bundle group information to understand what happened with that? And that, like, ICE things aren't owned by, you know, ICE sessions are reference counts by all the transports that might be using them, right? And they don't go away until no transport's using them.
I mean, maybe there's solutions we haven't considered. I guess I would recommend looking at the discussion thread, which has a lot more information. I mean, this is mainly a problem when M section gets rejected and you need to decide what to do as fallback.
Well, when that M section's rejected, you don't have to do any. I mean, you don't have to do anything, right? You stop doing that M section. So the question is the other M section that wasn't rejected? I mean, it keeps using the same ICE information, right? And you're
Well, that's what we would like to happen.
right.
That's just not, there's not an unambiguous way to signal that the offer wants that to happen right now.
So
the bundle?
As I interpret the spec.
Taylor, are you trying to, there seems to be two cases I'm trying to get between them. There's the case where the offer opens with 2M sections that are bundled and the first one is rejected. And there's the case where you negotiate 2 and then you renegotiate and you drop 1. Are you saying even the first cases will work properly, or are you saying only the second cases will work properly?
Actually, the first case, as currently spec'd, will never work. So if you want that changed, we should change the bundle spec.
I'm confused by that.
It's the second case I want.
Right, because I thought we went to a bunch of effort to make it precisely the case that you didn't have to associate the media parameters with the thing with the bundle tag. That they could all accumulate the same. Maybe I'm just confused. But it wasn't that the whole point of all this nonsense about the about being able to apply media parameters to CTP M-lines?
I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
Do you remember we had a thing where we added the rule that you could explicitly have inappropriate parameters on M-lines, like you could have effectively media parameters applying to CTP M-lines?
Oh,
to find the PR.
We made a change such that you don't have to duplicate attributes. You can just have the attributes in one M section, the one that's associated with the bundle tag. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm gonna have to go find the PR.
All right, I think we should continue the discussion on the mailing list.
Yep.
But it sounds like maybe there's some other things that we can do, but there aren't any oppositions to using the UFrag.
Not from here.
I think we need to look at the UFrag much deeper to understand whether it actually works. I understand it would work if it was all new stuff, but if it works in a backwards compatible way, it's just not clear to me it works. And that may just be I don't understand the problem well enough. I got no objection to it if it works, but I'm not at all convinced yet.
Okay.
How many cases are there where we actually have like an old client using bundle, and can't be, if it's going to use these UFrags, it has to use them in a way that JSEP is in sync with JSEP. And I think we could just make sure that JSEP codifies any sort of cases that it has to obey.
Probably true.
I mean, keep in mind that there are only ambiguities in corner cases anyway. So if you combine legacy endpoints with something that's a corner case in the first place, I think there probably won't be that many applications that would run into problems.
Okay.
No, I was worried more about us redefining how ICE works. Because that would, what I don't want us to go is say, hey, here's an easy solution for us, that'll work great. Then we go to the music working group, change ICE to work like that, and realize that that's a non-backwards compatible change with how ICE works, and that we end up, having the same discussion 9 months from now. This
shouldn't affect ICE at all. It only affects bundle.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. Okay.
So the resolution is that we need to investigate UFrag a bit more, or?
No, well, it's an issue really for the RTC Web and MMusic mailing lists. I guess we're waiting upon their change to resolve the issue in WebRTC.
And really, it's because it's MMusic, it's not RTC Web, right?
Yeah, it's MMusic, right?
Yeah.
So not a lot we can do before that. Okay. So we've just talked a bunch about set parameters, and I'll let Adam talk about this input validation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we need to.
I think the main issue here, Adam, right, is whether all all the checks are done synchronously.
Okay.
And
yeah.
what
Okay.
what
Now
the
we do.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just writing a resolution for the last one. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we currently have in the spec is that we have a bunch of parameter validation of set parameters, and all the checks that we have can be done synchronously, but the method is promise based to kind of support future errors that cannot be checked on the main thread. So I sent out a question on the mailing list asking what kind of errors would be that the media backend would report, and then I got some hints from Taylor and Bernard about some old issues where this was discussed, and there was a problem when the developer removes all the codecs except a codec that depends on hardware. So the best efforts thing won't work really because there's no software to choose from. So what's in PR 1560 right now is apart from the synchronous argument check, there's a part where you in parallel configure the media stack to use parameters for a particular sender, and then there's a section where the media stack can report back errors of different kinds, and the only one currently specified is hardware encoder error. So this is an RTC error. So when we have this in place, so we have at least one type of error that is asynchronous, then it's motivated to have this as a promise-based method, and we can add more errors.
Yeah. I guess the main purpose of having this slide in here is just to check that the model that we're using still makes sense. And because we just had the discussion about it relating to other issues, the idea is you'll check set parameters and maybe check resources or whatever. You'll figure out that there was an error, but the model we're using is that there's not some error that's going to happen like 10 minutes from now, right? So, because right now the sender and receiver have no generic async error handling. There's no on-error event handler or anything like that. And once you've accepted these parameters, you've executed set parameters, it's not like something's going to happen. Like somehow the hardware resources run out or something. Our assumption is somehow you cope with that, and you're not going to have an error like later. Does that make sense? I think we had a little bit of a similar discussion along these lines, I think, in a previous interim, but we just wanted to confirm that this is the model that we're using. Does that make sense? Let me ask this: are there any objections to proceeding on that model? Okay. So I guess Adam, you can write down that it's more or less accepted, and
yeah.
We'll see if there's some problem that shows up later. Okay, Stefan. Stefan, we can't hear you. Are you muted? Okay. Well, I'll talk to this one then. So basically, this question was about what happens with scale resolution down by, and say we had an example where say your input is 640 by 480, you'll use scale resolution down by 9. If you were to try to do that exactly, it's obviously you can't scale to 71.111 times 53.333. Is that Stefan? Okay. You can also have other input where, other examples of this where you use scale resolution down by 2 and you have some fractional pixels, right? So the question is what you do here. And previously, I should mention, we unless you have some illegal value of scale resolution down by, we never create an error. So none of these cases would ever generate an error. And then the question is, what do you try to do? And this is PR 1577, which basically says round up to the nearest integer. So that you don't have fractional pixels or something weird like that.
Bernard, why round up rather than round? I mean, I know it's a nit, but...
Yeah, I think that was a discussion in the issue.
Ecker, I think that was my suggestion, or at least as one of the people on the roundup, and because it gets you out of the problems of like what happens when you get to 0 and stuff like that, and it just seems like consistent with your general. We don't have to define exactly what rounding means, and it doesn't have that what happens when we get to 0 problem.
No, it has the problem what happens when you get to exactly the same resolution as your current resolution.
You send it, what happens then is you send, at that point you're at the 1.1, so you send 1 by 1. I mean, it's a ridiculous place to be, but at least it doesn't crash.
But it's going to be one beautiful pixel.
Maybe one long stream of pixels. That's fine. I think that's an absolutely fine case.
Okay, well, I'm fine with that, but then the term is not round. The term is seal.
Right.
Yeah, okay, we'll update. Can you hear me now, by the way?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Actually, why don't you take over? We're done?
Actually, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my mic didn't work earlier. So persons who filed this issue, there was a third bullet there. What if, like the WebRTC code.org code requires all the layers have the same aspect ratio?
That's in the next slide, actually, that question.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But are people okay with the previous slide, given that we update round to seal?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure because of the what's going to be discussed next. Like, it's not quite clear like what the encoder should do here. I think it would be easier actually if it just cropped, and rather than trying to actually generate data. This is actually what we have done in practice when we have like odd resolutions. Is just eat the last scan line or pixel.
Okay, you mean round down really or crop away?
Right, because otherwise,
section.
basically, you have to, interpolate data or something. Because like if you're doing like a bilinear interpolation to go down from, by 2, that last scan line is going to either have to be copied or somehow interpolated. But if you just crop it off before you do your round down, like you do a floor, then it's much, much simpler.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have the
Justin,
0
that
problem.
Works for me.
Okay.
Yeah, but these are such corner cases that it explodes if you do that. Like, if you say, 64 by 480 and like round down by, scale down by 720, like I'm fine with that.
Okay, so we change to floor instead of seal.
I would be okay if it was like implementation specific behavior, but like if we feel like we need to mandate something, I would recommend a floor.
First, I wrote it as implementation specific. Just put round.
I'm not certain we need to mandate it, but I think if we do mandate, we should at least say what happens if it's 0.
Sure, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so the resolution is floor, and we specify what happens if you get to 0.
Mm-hmm.
And would that be to have 1 instead?
Yeah, though then you're back in Justin's problem.
Yeah, exactly. You don't send.
I would just say an error would probably be the right thing. Like in this case, it seems pretty extreme.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm also fine if it says if it's 0, what the implementation does is implementation defined. That's fine because I don't care about that case.
Well, yeah, my problem is that error would actually be something that would occur 10 minutes later, right? Because like you changed the resolution, and
right.
So that's what's problematic.
I think error is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, you've convinced me.
Okay. I think we have a path there.
So the resolution is to floor instead of seal, and document what happens if we reach 0.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So we done with this one?
Yeah, I guess, no, the previous slide again. Perhaps Jan Ivar, you should talk about it. No, next slide. Slide 22, I guess.
Okay.
So it's continuing on the same issue a little bit, that what happens in WebRTC.org code, it's a requirement that all layers have the same aspect. And so with the scaling factor,
Andrew?
I'm hearing other noise.
Great. Because this is now the part we actually have to pay attention to, right?
Eric, we can hear you.
So, Jan Ivar.
Okay. Yeah, so basically you can end up in cases where, due to rounding, whichever way, whether it's floor or ceiling, we get a different aspect, and the WebRTC.org code fails. So
that's an issue in the WebRTC.org code. I don't think that's an issue for the spec.
But Randall, the JSEP spec says that you must preserve the aspect ratio.
Right. Right. That's right. So, but you must preserve the aspect ratio. So if you have a scale down by 3, let's see.
I like Justin's idea of shaving off a line, but
yeah. So this is the within reason, basically allowing it the aspect ratio modulo the fact that we have integer number of pixels to be the same.
And I mean, I like this within reason, but I guess it should be added to the JSEP spec somehow, because I would like us to reference that spec.
Yeah.
I don't know what Ecker and Cullen and Justin say about that.
So let me just, within what you mean by the within reason is you'll shave off, you'll round down a little bit extra for you'll crop a little bit more to preserve the aspect, to guarantee the aspect ratio, right?
No, I think it's the other way around. I mean, you divide by 3 and you get to a non-integer value. So you shave off a little and suddenly on the width or height, and suddenly you do not have exactly the right aspect ratio, because that would require you to send a fraction pixels.
Right. So I basically preserve the aspect ratio within, the issue, the fact that we have to deal with integer number of pixels.
Correct.
What I would suggest. And whether that's here or in JSEP, I don't really care.
So, yeah, I don't know if I can do the math live here, but I think Pearson suggested that it might be hard in some cases to find resolutions. But you might have to deviate quite a bit to find an exact aspect match. Especially,
I wouldn't.
A lot of these.
I wouldn't deviate much. I would basically do the division, and round the pixels as needed, as per previous discussion, and then ship it. And the fact that if the aspect ratio is slightly off due to the rounding or whatever, oh well.
Right, so to paraphrase what you're saying, Randall, if we're scaled down by X, we divide the width by X, we divide the height by X, we take the floor of both of those, and the aspect ratio is what the aspect ratio is when we're done that. That's it.
Yes.
Right, so I don't think there's any within reason here. It's just the aspect can change slightly due to the way we do the round down.
Yeah.
Like all implementations will end up with the same size video is what I'm getting at.
Right.
I just want to make sure they do not go against the JSEP spec or this spec when doing that.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. But JSEP really wouldn't contradict this. JSEP really just talks about fitting image adder, and this is not fitting image adder. This is an entirely different thing.
And we can define it here.
Yeah.
But can't you get to the same situation with image adder? No, maybe not.
The image adder could say the video has to be larger than 10,000, and then you're not going to send it. It has nothing to do with this scaling, right? I mean, if you're outside what the image adder specified, then you don't send it. But that's a totally separate issue.
I mean, the one thing we haven't talked about at all, and is really perhaps even a more important situation, is the case where the encoder needs to ramp down the resolution of the encoding to meet bandwidth limitations. And that's all going to happen internal to the implementation. And Jason talks about this a little bit, but just as an aside. It just needs to make sure that whatever it's doing is consistent with whatever has been expressed by the remote side in terms of the minimum resolution. But, the same sort of thing, it's trying to preserve aspect ratio to the extent that it can. And that's the spirit here, and I think the conclusion makes sense.
So I think we have a way forward here. So we will invent some text saying that.
So the resolution is that we allow aspect ratios to change due to rounding?
Yeah, due to rounding to integer width and height.
Okay. All right. So this was a question that came from Cullen as to how to discover what algorithm identifier values the browser supports. So in PR 1553, we have a proposal for this, which is to add a get supported algorithms method, which returns a sequence of at least one supported algorithm. And I guess the question for the group is this something people will implement? And is there consensus to add this to the spec to solve the problem Cullen brought up?
I thought we had discussed this at a previous virtual interim, and the issue was that an algorithm identifier is a parameterized thing, and the browser may support essentially an infinite number of combinations of parameters. So what would this return? It would have to return some representative subset, and how would we define that?
It's not necessarily all of the supported algorithms, but some set of. We used the word suggested or recommended or something.
Cullen, is your theory that this would for RSA, this would return RSA 2048 even if I supported everything between 2048 and 16K?
I don't really have a theory on this. I recognize the problem that was brought up before.
RSA is the problem. All the other ones are fine. All the other ones are discrete.
Okay. So with RSA, it would return the largest RSA one you possibly supported and maybe one other one. Or it would return only the largest one you support with the assumption you supported anything smaller than that.
Oh, you probably don't. Okay, so I think you probably don't want that because typically it's like 15,000
people.
per sequence.
Right.
So, but I think we'd be prepared to implement this because it's easy with the with the caveat that we'd pick some set of RSA numbers we thought were safe. We'd pick 2048 and maybe 3072 or 4096.
That would totally work for me. The fact that I got one. I would expect it to return one reasonably high security RSA you might use at the current point in time, at the browser's discretion.
I think we'd be willing to do that. It's not a lot of work for us.
Yeah, can people comment on the PR then? Because all it says right now is just some set of supported stuff. It doesn't kind of provide me guidance about what exactly to choose. But
I'll make some comments now.
Okay, thank you. But can I assume that there is consensus to add this at all? People do feel it's something they want to add to the spec? let me put it this way: are there any objections to adding this to the spec?
I don't object. I would point out Martin Thompson is on PTO. He may make a fuss when he gets back, but my sense is he's in the rough on this one.
Okay. All right. I think that's enough guidance for this one.
So Bernard, I guess we need to quit now, unfortunately.
Oh, are we completely out of time? We have 1 minute left, but
Okay.
I guess that's not enough. I don't know if that's enough to get consensus on this one, but
No.
okay, probably not.
So on that, I mean, we didn't get through all of them today, so I'm going to do a doodle for a new interim meeting in mid-October. Is the plan now? Just as a heads up. And yeah, we will be starting also discussing the TPEC agenda proposal soon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess that's all for today. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
I was muted. So there's no resolution for the last topic that we discussed.
Well.
Yeah, there was no one objected to adding something like that, but the PR needs massaging.
Needs review. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.